"Ma'am, step away and keep your hands where we can see them." That's what my wife, Sarah, heard one morning while she bent down on our front lawn, tying her shoelace. She was minding her business, dressed in her usual jogging hoodie, when she looked up, confused, maybe even slightly amused, and found herself being approached by two uniformed officers, their hands hovering near their weapons like she was about to commit a felony in broad daylight. There she stood, calm as always, with her legally holstered sidearm at her hip, something she was fully authorized to carry. You see, Sarah doesn't pretend to be anything she's not. The moment one officer muttered, "Female suspect is armed, potential threat," responding to neighborhood complaint, the other officer's eyes fell on the badge clipped to her waistband, and that's when their whole posture changed. Fear didn't come from Sarah, it came from them. They stepped back like they'd just seen a ghost. "Wait, you're Chief Bennett?" Sarah Bennett. Across the street, the culprit behind the chaos was grinning smugly, phone in hand, tiny dog on a leash. Karen Franklin, queen of the local HOA and self-appointed neighborhood watchdog, was reporting every second of the scene into her phone like she was narrating an episode of some low-budget reality TV show. What she didn't realize, she had just made a false police report about the chief of police. A felony, and she had no clue. But this wasn't the first clash. Karen had been on a power trip since snagging her third HOA term, thanks to her infamous bribe barbecue gatherings and laughable voter turnout. After that, she was everywhere, throwing out fines for everything under the sun. Grass too long? $25. Sidewalk chalk? $50. Holiday lights still up after New Year's? $100. But her latest fixation? Visible firearms. She claimed they made people uncomfortable. Never mind that we live in a state where open carry is entirely legal. And after the string of break-ins last fall, most neighbors actually felt safer seeing Sarah out there with her sidearm. But Karen wasn't concerned with safety. She saw Sarah as a threat to her self-made authority. 2 days before the police incident, Karen had marched up to Sarah while she was oiling tools in the front yard and declared, "You'll be fined $500 per day for displaying that weapon." Sarah, patient as ever, explained that she was off duty, well within her legal rights, and that the HOA had no jurisdiction over this matter. Karen gave her a sharp sniff and said, "That might be true for ordinary people, but someone in your position should set an example, not look like she's ready for a shootout." Sarah just smiled. "I am setting an example, one that follows the law, not your personal newsletter." Karen stormed off, muttering, "I'll take care of this." And true to her word, 2 days later, she did exactly what we expected. Called 911 the moment Sarah stepped outside wearing her holster. The officers who arrived quickly realized their mistake once they recognized her. One of them couldn't stop apologizing, while the other turned beet red. Sarah, calm as ever, said, "You're just doing your job. Now I have to do mine." Across the street, Karen's triumphant grin melted. Sarah walked over and told her plainly, "You filed a false police report. That's a crime." Karen stammered, "I didn't know it was you. You weren't in uniform. How was I supposed to know?" Sarah answered, "That's exactly why you don't make those calls unless you're sure of what you're seeing. You endangered people, officers, neighbors, and you'll be held accountable." That evening, the doorbell rang. One after another, neighbors showed up with brownies, pie, a case of soda, telling us, "We saw the whole thing. That woman's unhinged. What can we do to help?" It meant more than they knew. Sarah's never been one for attention, even as chief. But now the neighborhood saw her for who she truly was: calm, principled, and unwilling to be intimidated. Of course, Karen didn't back down. She sent out a newsletter accusing Sarah of intimidation, painting herself as a terrified civilian under siege. She didn't name Sarah directly, but the implication was obvious. Sarah didn't react publicly. Instead, she filed an official complaint with the city attorney, attached the 911 recording, body cam footage, and HOA flyers. She had already been warned once that Karen's antics were stirring rumors. Now she had the facts. When Sarah presented her case in a private session with the city council, she laid it all out: harassment, overreach, Anonymous threats traced back to HOA mailings. One councilman shook his head and said, "I thought HOAs were about flower beds and potlucks, not dictatorship." Still, Karen believed she was invincible. She held a special HOA session to push her weapon ban, citing her own 911 call as justification. But this time, the residents didn't stay quiet. Greg, a quiet neighbor we barely knew, stood up and said, "You lied to the police. You put our neighborhood in danger. It's only luck we're not voting you out right now." Karen's face flushed. Even her own VP edged away. He leaned over, whispered something, and her face fell. The room had turned. She tried spinning the story by calling a local journalist. What she didn't know was that the reporter's child had once been rescued from a house fire by Sarah. The article that ran wasn't the smear piece she'd hoped for. It was an exposé on HOA abuse and a tribute to Sarah's strength and fairness. Karen, doubling down, printed glossy newsletters for the entire neighborhood, rewriting the whole narrative. She made herself the victim of a terrifying incident, conveniently leaving out facts and names. But everyone knew. At the next city public safety meeting, Sarah stood before a packed hall. She didn't raise her voice, didn't throw accusations. She presented the law, the evidence, and played just one clip, Karen's frantic 911 call. That sound, shaky, dramatic, and baseless, echoed in the room like a confession. They say mornings are quiet in our neighborhood, until that one changed everything. It began not with sirens, but with silence. The mayor leaned forward and asked, "Are you saying she knowingly filed a report against an innocent officer?" Sarah gave a calm nod. "She knew exactly who I was. She did it anyway." This wasn't fear. It was control masquerading as panic. The consequences came fast. The mayor called for a sweeping review of homeowners associations across the city. The city attorney launched a formal inquiry into enforcement practices. And then came an unexpected ally. Daniel Wu, the HOA's vice president, quietly admitted to Sarah that Karen, the president, had sidelined him for over a year, shoving through bogus fines, enforcing made-up rules, and turning the HOA into her personal fiefdom. Daniel submitted a signed statement to the city clerk. When the next HOA board meeting rolled around, the tide finally turned. Mrs. Geller, a 35-year resident, stood up. "Sarah's helped my family more times than I can count. And Karen, all you do is bark orders and hide behind your title." Another neighbor held up a copy of the HOA newsletter. "You lied. This wasn't about safety. It was about power." The crowd erupted. A vote of no confidence was called. Out of 31 total votes, 28 demanded Karen's removal, 2 wanted her to stay, and 1 abstained. Karen stormed out, furious. The next morning, Sarah got a call. Internal Affairs had combed through HOA records and found dozens of financial penalties issued solely by Karen. Missing required co-signatures, linked to inflated fines and even lawsuits. The city's legal team began preparing a fraud case. Karen's response? She spiraled. Online, she ranted about being hunted, claimed Sarah was misusing her badge, accused the new board of being puppets for law enforcement. Her posts turned into memes overnight. Then she filed a defamation suit against Sarah, ironically accusing her of intimidation. Sarah's brother Evan, a civil litigation attorney, looked over the complaint and laughed. "This is barely blog material." He filed a counterclaim so direct and damaging that Karen's lawyer asked for a recess and never returned. The case was thrown out in under a week. The newly appointed board acted fast. They launched a public transparency portal, making every vote and rule change visible. Every single fine issued by Karen was suspended. A committee was formed to rewrite the HOA's entire bylaw system. For the first time in years, people began to breathe easier. Kids played outside. Neighbors smiled again. The neighborhood felt like a community. But Karen wasn't done. She started leaving anonymous flyers under doors, accusing Sarah of being a rogue officer. When one skittish neighbor saw Sarah carrying her service weapon, they called 911. But the officer who responded was one of Sarah's trainees. He apologized and left. Sarah didn't flinch. She recorded it all. She was building a case. Then the city's financial review turned up a bombshell. Over $75,000 in HOA funds had been funneled into a phony security company. No license, no physical location. It was just a shell, likely for Karen's benefit. She cried persecution, but nobody believed her anymore. Her grip on reality weakened. She was escorted off public property after showing up with a megaphone, ranting about drones and conspiracies. She sent bizarre emails, one even allegedly signed by the former treasurer, who had been gone for months. That was enough for Sarah to obtain a restraining order. Sarah stayed focused. She converted her experience into a precinct training series on false reporting and HOA overreach. Her calm professionalism made an impact. Eventually, Karen vanished. Her house went on the market, then into foreclosure. Turns out, she had used HOA funds as collateral for private loans, likely to fund her phony security empire. 3 months later, Sarah was back jogging her morning route. Neighbors waved. Some saluted. The fear was gone. The tension had lifted. But one last twist remained. An anonymous envelope landed at City Hall, filled with badly doctored images of Sarah, absurd captions. Digital forensics traced them to the laptop Karen had turned in during the audit, but she had swapped it with a decoy. A warrant led to her storage unit. Inside, boxes of stolen HOA property, files on residents, surveillance drones, and a spreadsheet labeled priority control targets. It was all real. Her paranoia had turned to action. The city called an emergency session. Karen was formally charged with fraud, unauthorized surveillance, and embezzlement. The case expanded into a federal investigation. Her final move? A podcast appearance where she tried to reinvent herself as a whistleblower. But the editor, one of Sarah's former ments, turned the raw footage over to the district attorney. Within 48 hours, Karen was in court. And that, finally, is when peace began to take hold. Children rode bikes without glancing over their shoulders. Longtime neighbors started waving again. The old enforcement office converted into a neighborhood resource center. The city council even passed new laws mandating oversight for all HOAs, thanks to Sarah's case. At the commendation ceremony, the mayor joked, if Karen had known who Sarah was, she'd have picked a different neighborhood. Sarah just smiled. I'm glad she didn't. We're stronger now. A year later, we held a simple block party. No speeches, no drama. Just neighbors being neighbors. As music floated through the warm evening air, Sarah leaned over to me and said, you know the best part of all this? We didn't just stop her. We found our way back to each other. And after everything, I couldn't have said it better. So if you've ever watched good people get crushed by petty power, if you've seen someone weaponize rules to control others, speak up. Tell your story. Let's ask, where is the line between authority and abuse? Because in the end, this was never about one person winning. It was about all of us getting back what mattered most. Our neighborhood, our peace, and our dignity.